David grew up believing his mother died in a car accident when he was just 4 years old. 30 years later, while waiting at a traffic light, he locked eyes with an unfamiliar woman whose face inexplicably drew him in, compelling him to follow her to a small apartment across town. What he discovered inside that third-floor apartment would force him to question everything his family had ever told him. Growing up in the small town of Riverdale, David Collins had just one precious memento of his mother, a faded photograph showing a beautiful woman holding him as a baby. Her smile radiated warmth, making the picture all the more precious because it captured a moment from a life cut tragically short. For as long as David could remember, his Aunt Elaine told him his mother died in a car accident when he was just 4 years old. The details were always sparse, the conversation always brief. Whenever David pressed for more information, Elaine would skillfully change the subject, redirecting his attention to homework, dinner, or anything else that might distract a curious child. As David grew older, he began to notice something strange about these moments. When he asked about his mother, a peculiar look would cross Elaine's face. Not just sadness, but something deeper, more complex. It was as if she carried some heavy burden, a secret locked behind her carefully composed expressions. Elaine had done her best raising David as her own. She provided a comfortable home, made sure he excelled in school, and planned for his future with meticulous attention. She had a clear vision for David: college, business school, then a position at her firm where she had cultivated connections specifically for him. His path was laid out, ready to be followed, but David felt pulled in a different direction. After high school, despite his aunt's vigorous objections, he announced his intention to join the military. The arguments that followed stretched for months, creating a tension that had never before existed between them. When the military recruiter finally came to their house with papers to sign, David braced himself for another heated confrontation. Instead, something unexpected happened. Elaine's fierce opposition suddenly dissolved, replaced by a resigned silence that seemed heavier than all her previous protests combined. She watched him sign the papers with an expression he couldn't quite read, part sorrow, part something that looked almost like pride. The years that followed transformed David. Military life gave him the structure and purpose he had been seeking. He excelled in training, displaying a natural aptitude for strategy and situational awareness that caught the attention of his superiors. His career progressed rapidly, and by 34, he had risen through the ranks to become a military intelligence officer with an impressive record. One rainy evening in Washington, D.C., David sat waiting at a traffic light, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm as raindrops created streams down his windows. It was a moment like any other, until it wasn't. Glancing absently at the car beside him, David's attention caught on the driver. She was just an ordinary-looking older woman, gray hair pulled back in a simple style, glasses perched on her nose, features that wouldn't stand out in any crowd. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that should have triggered any response in him. Yet something inexplicable drew his gaze and held it. A strange feeling washed over him, a certainty that defied logical explanation. Despite having no memory of his mother as an adult, despite having nothing to compare this woman to, except a single photograph of someone 30 years younger, David felt a powerful recognition that made his heart race. When the light turned green, instead of continuing on his planned route home, David made a split-second decision. He followed the woman's car, staying several vehicles behind, his military training automatically kicking in. He noted each turn with precision, maintaining a careful distance to avoid detection while keeping her vehicle in sight. The woman drove to a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. She parked on the street, gathered a few items from her passenger seat, and walked unhurriedly toward the entrance. David parked half a block away and observed for 20 minutes, monitoring the building and assessing the situation. Inside his car, David's mind raced. What was he doing? Following a stranger based on nothing but a gut feeling? It was irrational, perhaps even reckless. Yet the sensation pulling him forward was too strong to ignore. When the woman had been inside for some time, David made his move. Using the skills honed through years of military intelligence work, he approached the building and slipped inside unnoticed. He tracked her to a third-floor apartment, moving silently through the hallways, staying alert for any signs of danger or discovery. Outside her apartment door, David paused. The door was slightly ajar, an unexpected detail that instantly put him on high alert. In his experience, doors left open were either invitations or traps. Drawing his concealed weapon, he slowly pushed the door open, scanning the interior with trained precision. The apartment was sparsely furnished, but the layout struck David as oddly familiar to him. Something about the arrangement seemed deliberate, strategic. Every piece of furniture was positioned to maintain clear sightlines to all entrances. Exits were easily accessible. It was the home of someone who understood tactics, someone who never let their guard down. The woman stood by the window with her back to him, apparently unaware of his presence. David's attention was drawn to a small table beside her, positioned just out of view from the window. On it sat a collection of framed photographs, photographs that made his breath catch in his throat. They were all of him. David as a child on a bicycle, David at his high school graduation, David in his military uniform at various stages of his career. Images spanning decades of his life, carefully preserved and displayed with what could only be described as pride. Without turning around, the woman spoke, her voice calm and measured. She asked if David had noticed how easy it had been to follow her. The question froze him in place as realization dawned. He hadn't tracked her here. She had led him here. When she finally turned to face him, there was no surprise in her eyes, only assessment. David lowered his weapon slowly, his mind reeling with implications. The woman gestured for him to sit down and he complied, his training allowing him to maintain composure despite the shock coursing through him. For the next several hours, she spoke, filling in the blanks of David's history. She told him about his father, a kind man who had died before David was born. She described their life together before his birth, painting a picture of happiness that had been shattered by circumstances beyond their control. David listened intently, noting not just what she said, but what she avoided mentioning. There were gaps in her story, carefully navigated omissions, that his intelligence training helped him identify. Whatever the full truth was, she was sharing only part of it. Near midnight, after a long pause in her narrative, she asked David if he knew why she had allowed him to see her today. David considered the question, examining all he had observed in the apartment, all he had heard in her carefully constructed story. He stated simply that she was testing him. The subtle smile that crossed her face confirmed his assessment. She explained that before David's birth, she had been an operative for a highly classified military intelligence unit, the very division David now served in, though under a different name and structure. The coincidence of their shared career was too great to be accidental. She had been watching his progress, monitoring his ascent through the ranks from a distance. She needed to know if he truly had what it took, not just the skills and training, but the deeper understanding of what sacrifice meant in their line of work. Everything suddenly made new sense to David. Aunt Elaine's strong opposition to his military career, followed by that strange, resigned silence when he finally enlisted. The pieces fit together. His aunt had known all along where this path might lead him. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, David and his mother cautiously built the relationship they had been denied for 30 years. They met in secure locations, shared more of their stories, filled in the gaps that had existed in each other's lives. Finally, David brought her to Elaine's home. When his aunt opened the door and saw her sister standing there, she broke into tears, embracing the woman she had protected with her silence for decades. She whispered about keeping the secret all these years, her voice breaking with emotion. David watched the reunion, understanding finally washing over him. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She had protected him. By letting him believe she was dead, she had shielded him from the dangers that had forced her into hiding. As David embraced his mother, a gesture that was becoming more natural with each passing day, he told her he was proud of her. Her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. She smiled, the expression transforming her deliberately forgettable features into something beautiful. She said they were both soldiers, and they understood the price of protection better than most. With the threats that had forced her underground finally neutralized, his mother could reclaim her identity. They could build a relationship in the open at last. Mother and son connected not just by blood, but by shared values of duty and sacrifice. That evening, sitting at his aunt's dining table with both women, David finally understood what had drawn him to that car at the traffic light. It hadn't been recognition of a face, but something deeper, a connection that transcended memory, that had remained intact despite 30 years of separation. In finding his mother, David had also found a missing piece of himself, a legacy of service that ran in his blood. The photograph he had treasured all his life was no longer his only connection to her. Now they could create new memories together, building a future neither had dared to imagine possible. And as you sit watching this, consider for a moment, what invisible connections might be guiding your own life, pulling you toward truths you don't yet understand?